estimated 110 million people live here in the DRC. 3 out of 4 of them often don't have access to even the basics: shelter, clean drinking water, and enough food. 1 in 12 children here dies before the age of 12. The DRC is among the 5 poorest countries in the world. It's this misery that drives hundreds of thousands of Congolese to work in mining sites like this one. This is dangerous work in dangerous conditions, and for just a few dollars a day. Child labor, threats and violence are often reported, not to mention the vast environmental damage. All these things are happening because of the rush for riches under the ground. An estimated $24 trillion worth of minerals lie beneath the surface.
You have a country that is effectively one of the richest countries in the world, certainly the wealthiest country in Africa, with all kinds of resources that you can imagine, some of which have not even been discovered. You talk of any resource, name it, it is in the Congo in plenty.
For instance, gold, for jewelry and electronics. Cobalt, used for batteries like in electric cars. The DRC has more than half of the world's cobalt reserves. Copper, vital for solar panels. And coltan, it's literally everywhere in electronic devices, for example, in your smartphone. An estimated 60 to 80% of global coltan reserves are in the DRC. So you can imagine everybody wants a piece of this pie. Be they militia groups controlling informal mines, or huge multinational companies that have set up massive industrial complexes. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, or DRC, could be one of the richest countries in the world. That's because of what lies below the ground here: vast resources such as gold, cobalt, and coltan. But the DRC is not rich. In fact, many Congolese people are among the world's poorest.
While people are distracted by the war, others are profiting from the natural resources.
We're going to look at how the DRC became a looting ground for the power-hungry and the corporate. When it comes to the DRC's long history of exploitation, we kind of have to start with this man. King Leopold II of Belgium. In 1885, he seized this territory as his personal property and named it Congo Free State. It was anything but. An estimated 10 million Congolese were killed or died from hunger or disease during Leopold's cruel rule. Many were enslaved and forced to work collecting rubber, used for making car and bicycle tires.
In 1885, King Leopold II took over the country of Congo as his own personal property. That is something that I still cannot wrap my mind around. How anybody can decide that this new country, because of its natural resources and its beauty, is henceforth my personal property. How? We really need to talk about the Berlin Conference someday, when Africa was literally divided among colonialists as if Africa belonged to them. But even before then, even before the Berlin Conference, the US had recognized Belgium as the owner of the Congo. The country of Congo, by the way, is 77 times bigger than the country of Belgium. But because he had soldiers and they had guns, King Leopold, for 23 years, he unleashed the most brutal enslavement in Africa. King Leopold II forced the people of Congo to extract their own natural resources for him to build Belgium. They were not seen as human beings, by the way, the people of Congo. In fact, animals were treated better than them. At least 10 million Congolese people were massacred in the 23 years that King Leopold II was in charge of Congo. The millions of Congolese people whom he cut off their hands, whom he starved, whom he held their children as ransom. In fact, he cut off the hands of so many children as well, and he burned down so many villages at a time, because anytime they failed to meet the quota of extracting rubber, among other things.
And the exploitation continued after 1908, when Belgium turned the Congo Free State into a colony.
Now, the situation in Congo was so bad that there was a public outcry all over the world. There were reports of widespread murder, torture, and other abuses in the rubber plantations, and this led to international outcries against King Leopold II. And so the Belgian government took control of Congo from King Leopold, and they decided to make it a colony of Belgium instead of a country of slaves that are being treated anyhow. So in 1908, Congo became a colony of Belgium. Just imagine, this is your country. People came to your country and suddenly you are not human anymore. They were not even allowed to be educated beyond secondary school until about the 50s.
But in 1960, there was hope for a new start. This was the year the DRC gained independence and its first prime minister, Patrice Lumumba.
Malcolm X called him the greatest black man who ever walked the African continent, while Belgium and the US plotted his assassination. His name was Patrice Lumumba, the first Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo. He is considered by many a martyred hero, a symbol of anti-imperialism and Pan-African unity. This is the story of how Lumumba came to power, dreaming of a better future for the Congo and Africa, and how that dream quickly turned into a nightmare as he was arrested and murdered in January of 1961, less than 7 months after independence. In 1956, he was invited by the Ministry of Colonies to a study tour in Belgium, which he attended only to be arrested upon his arrival back to the Congo, with charges of embezzling money from the post office. He served a 12-month sentence, and once free, Lumumba launched the Congolese National Movement, or the MNC, the first nationwide political party in the Congo. In 1958, the same year he launched this party, Lumumba attended the first All-African People's Conference in Accra, Ghana. His vision and Pan-African vocabulary impressed the gathering and turned eyes across the continent. Taking notice of the nationalist fervor on the rise across Africa,
Philosophy was that Africans don't need to depend and that they have everything they need to be self-sufficient. So that same year, he attended the All-African People's Conference in Accra, Ghana, which was hosted by Ghanaian Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame really loved Patrice, by the way, he really admired him. And this is where his speech in Ghana inspired a lot of Africans of like-minded.
and with anti-colonial independence struggles at full throttle, the Belgian government announced local elections in December 1959. Lumumba's MNC wanted to boycott the race, deeming it an illegitimate Belgian attempt at installing a puppet government. Many Congolese boycotted in protest, and the Belgian authorities responded with repression. 30 Congolese were killed in Stanleyville, Kinsigani, and Lumumba was arrested on charges of inciting a riot. The MNC changed its tactics and decided to join the election race. They claimed a sweeping victory with 90% of the vote and demanded the release of Lumumba in order to discuss the formation of a government and national independence. Their demands were met, and Lumumba became the first prime minister of his country in 1960. On Independence Day, while the King of Belgium was attending and the world was watching, Lumumba delivered a powerful speech that would live on as a benchmark for the anti-imperial struggle in Africa and the world.
His party, the MNC, won a majority in the December local elections in the Congo. And as a result of strong pressure from delegates who are upset by Lumumba's trial, he was released and allowed to attend the Brussels conference, where it was decided that Congo would finally and formally become an independent country by June of that year, June 30th of 1960. And then on June 30th, 1960, Patrice became the first prime minister of Congo, and he gave a speech that the world did not forget. That speech did not sit well with Belgium. Keep in mind, by the way, that his speech that day was in response to the speech given by King Baudouin. While he was granting them independence, he went on into praising King Leopold II, saying that he didn't come as a conqueror, but he came to civilize them.
L'indépendance du Congo constitue l'aboutissement de l'œuvre conçue par le génie du roi Léopold II, entreprise par lui avec un courage tenace et continuée avec persévérance par la Belgique.
Il demande surtout de ne rien changer. si on n'est pas sûr de faire mieux.
Nobody criticized King Belgium for what he had said. He said all those things, and the president, you know, they had the prime minister and they had the president. The president, when it was his turn, he just got up and thanked the king for his speech. But when it was time for Patrice to speak, he decided to say what was actually in the minds of so many of the Congolese people. He was not afraid.
Les insultes, les coups que nous devions subir matin, midi et soir, parce que nous étions des nègres. Qui oubliera qu'à un noir, on disait tu, non certes comme à un ami, mais parce que les voix honorables étaient réservées aux seuls blancs.
This man, at the age of 35, spoke without apology about how his people had been treated by Belgium.
Nous avons connu que nos terres furent spoliées au nom des textes prétendument légaux qui ne faisaient que reconnaître les droits du plus fort. Nous avons connu que la loi n'était jamais la même, selon qu'il s'agissait d'un blanc ou d'un noir, accommodante pour les uns, cruelle inhumaine pour les autres.
But as expected, that speech did not sit well with Belgium. It didn't even sit well with the West because according to history books, most European journalists that reported that speech, because you know it was televised, they were shocked by Lumumba's speech. And Western media criticized him instead of praising him for what he said. In fact, Time magazine at that time characterized his speech as a venomous attack. Many people feared that his speech was a call to arms, was going to incite Africans to start attacking them. One thing that Belgium and the US realized that day was that they would not be able to control Patrice Lumumba and that he would not willingly give his country's natural resources to them. Because throughout the 1940s and the 1950s, the Congo was actually #1 supplier of uranium to the US. In fact, 80% of the uranium that America used to build the nuclear bombs that were launched against Japan during the World War II in 1945, which made the US win, originated from the mines of Congo. So you can see how not just Belgium but the US also needed access to the resources of the Democratic Republic of Congo. So Patrice became a stumbling block for them, which is why till today there are several debates about whether or not the US, the CIA, is involved in the killing of Patrice Lumumba or not.
2 months later, with the CIA, with White House approval, decreeing that he should be assassinated. Giving independence to an African colony was okay for them as long as it didn't disturb existing business arrangements, as long as the European country could continue to own the mines, the factories, the plantation.
Now, most Americans, and even many diplomatic historians, are not aware of the fact that there was a CIA role in the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. The CIA station chief, Larry Devlin, participated, along with the Belgian officials and Congolese on the CIA payroll, in the decision to transfer Lumumba to this secessionist state of Katanga.
Also keep in mind that Democracy Now! In 2011 interviewed a former CIA agent who had this to say about what happened.
CIA had developed a program to assassinate Lumumba. The operation didn't work. They didn't follow through on it. It was to give poison to Lumumba, and they couldn't find a setting in which to get the poison to him successfully in a way that it wouldn't appear to be a CIA operation. I mean, you couldn't invite him to a cocktail party and give him a drink and have him die a short time later, obviously.
And so it was not a surprise after he gave that speech that within 7 days of him becoming a prime minister, rebels sprung up in different parts of the country wanting to take power from Patrice. And then Belgium said that they were going to help him to stop the rebels. But guess what Belgium did? They brought in soldiers to work with the rebels so that they could overthrow Patrice. So Patrice asked for help from the United Nations, and they said no. And so guess what he did? He turned to the Soviet Union, enemies of Belgium, enemies of the US. You know, the understanding was if the Soviet Union should help Patrice, they may now have access to the uranium to build nuclear weapons, which the other parties don't want.
Immediately after Congolese independence and the start of Lumumba's prime ministership, units of the army rebelled, largely because of objections to their Belgian commander. Belgium sent in 6,000 troops, announcing that they were in place for the protection of Belgian nationals in the country. A day later, a man named Moise Tshombe took advantage of the power struggle and proclaimed the secession of the mineral-rich province of Katanga from the Congo, with support from the Belgian government and mining companies. In reality, it was a treacherous move. The Belgian troops protected and supported Chompe's rebellion. They had moved in to secure its colonial cash cow and undermine Lumumba's rule. Running out of options, Lumumba reached out to the United Nations to expel Belgian forces and help restore internal order. Lumumba requested UN troops to suppress the rebellion in Katanga, but the UN forces were not authorized to do so under their mandate. The United States and France also refused to budge. Frustrated with the West, Lumumba tilted the balance and reached out to the Soviet Union, requesting planes to fly his army to Katanga. Lumumba, a skilled statesman, also assembled African heads of state in Leopoldville, Kinshasa, asking for their full support in his efforts to quell the rebellion and unify the DRC. Lumumba's ambition was to free the Congo and Africa of foreign colonial influence.
And so the US and Belgium sponsored to get rid of Patrice Lumumba.
They handled it by the chief of station talking to Mobutu about the threat that Lumumba posed, and Mobutu going out and killing Lumumba, having his men kill Lumumba.
And did I mention that Patrice had a personal assistant by the name Mobutu Sese Seko? Mobutu Sese Seko used to be close to Patrice Lumumba. He used to be in the army, and he used to be an informant for the Belgians. And also he used to be a journalist. It breaks my heart because, to be honest with you, the summary of Patrice Lumumba's story is that we Africans are our own problem. There was nothing outsiders could do if there was no one inside willing to compromise. It's so unfortunate that someone that was close to him became the person that was used against him. And guess what is still happening today? We have never been united. If we were united, we wouldn't be where we are. If the people of Congo were united, first of all, there wouldn't be any uprising by any rebels in the first place. And if only Mobutu Sese Seko was not a sellout, Patrice Lumumba may still be alive today. We don't know. But by now, Patrice had trusted Mobutu so much so that when he became the prime minister, he gave Mobutu Sese Seko the office of the Secretary of State to the presidency. And then when the rebels started agitating in different parts of the country and the Belgium sided with the rebels, Patrice fired the Belgian military officers. And he made his confidant, Mobutu Sese Seko, the chief of staff of the army.
By aligning himself to American and Belgian interests, Mobutu realized that he could use their military might to consolidate power for himself and create a perfectly symbiotic relationship between him and two of the world's most powerful countries.
Someday we'll talk about Mobutu. Patrice had no idea that by making him the head of the army, he just gave him the resources he needed to overthrow him.
Acting in collaboration with President Kasavubu, the Belgians and the Americans, Mobutu would go on to arrange for the capture and secret execution of the very same man that had brought him to the corridors of power.
And I think I should let you guys know that he was 31 years old at that time when he decided to betray Patrice, when he decided to betray his own country for greed, for Belgium. And so he had him arrested.
Following his capture by crack commandos of strongman Colonel Mobutu, taken to Mobutu's headquarters past a jeering, threatening crowd, Lumumba was impassive at this lowest ebb of his stormy career. Mobutu watched as his troops manhandled Lumumba, but promised the pro-red Lumumba a fair trial.
And of course, after torturing Patrice and his men that were arrested with him.
So the Congo was very important for the US and its Western allies. But Lumumba's problems did not end there. Internally, he was up against President Kasavubu, who did not approve of Lumumba's actions and wanted a moderate, pro-Western approach and policy. The president fired Lumumba from his position on the 5th of September 1960, after less than 3 months in power, and placed him under house arrest. Lumumba rejected the dismissal on legal grounds, and the two were trapped in a power struggle. A few days later, Army General Mobutu Sese Seko, backed by Belgium and the USA, stepped in and took control of the government. Mobutu reached a working agreement with Kasavubu, and the UN had decided to recognize the legitimacy of the Kasavubu-Mobutu government. When Lumumba tried to escape home confinement, Mobutu had Lumumba arrested again and sent him to Katanga's secessionist forces. Lumumba, alongside two of his associates, Joseph Okito and Maurice Mpolo, were treated deplorably while being held captive. Eventually, on 17th January 1961, the three men were executed by a firing squad with the full knowledge and collaboration of the Belgians. Initially, their bodies were thrown in shallow graves, but later, under the direction of Belgian officers, the bodies were dug up, hacked into pieces, and dissolved in acid. Lumumba's death was a shock for Africa and the global anti-colonial movement. In 2002, Belgium apologized to the Congolese people for its role in Lumumba's assassination. In 2013, the US State Department admitted that President Dwight Eisenhower had authorized Lumumba's murder, but said the plan was not carried out. In addition, records show that French diplomats in Africa at the time of Lumumba's murder were calling directly for the elimination of the Congolese leader. And so there is no way around the fact that there was Western involvement in his assassination, and at the highest level.
Dictator Joseph Desiré Mobutu ruled for 32 years. Mobutu, with his distinctive leopard print hat, renamed the country Zaire. And he grew eye-wateringly rich, looting the national coffers at the people's expense. Western countries, including the US, were willing to turn a blind eye. They wanted to keep him close to them and away from the Soviet Union because, you guessed it, they of course wanted priority access to the country's resources. The DRC is the largest country in sub-Saharan Africa, and it's bordered by 9 countries. One of them, Rwanda, actually plays a big role in this tragedy. In return for access to the mine, China pledged to build roads, schools, and hospitals. Sounds like a win-win situation, right? But not much of the promised investment has materialized. Congolese people still have to make do with roads like this. So where did all the money actually go? Mostly lost in corruption, a key reason for poverty in the country. The DRC is ranked 162 out of 180 on Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index. This basically means corruption is everywhere in the country, including in deals with multinational companies, whether European or Chinese.
The Congolese people have had governments thrusted upon them.
M23's fighters enter the city of Goma hours after the armed group said it had taken control.
Why is Rwanda involved, and what does it want?
We turn now to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Fighting is continuing in the eastern city of Goma between Congolese forces and Rwandan-backed M23 fighters who've seized at least parts of Goma. The fighting has killed at least 17 people with over 370 injured. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called on Rwandan forces to immediately withdraw from the DRC and end its support for M23 as fears grow of a wider regional war.
This is a part of a 30-year war of aggression and plunder by U.S. allies, Rwanda, led by Paul Kagame, and Uganda, led by Yoweri Museveni. And this war of aggression and plunder has been able to continue as a result of the support that they have received from major powers like the United States, the United Kingdom, the European Union, France. Really what needs to happen is just stronger action on the part of the Western nations. They can do that. 40% of Rwanda's budget comes from the West. Congo is so critical. It's a vital country to not only to Africa, but to the world at large. It's a part of the second largest rainforest in the world, sequesters more carbon than all the tropical rainforests combined, producing 70% of the world's cobalt. Cobalt is an essential ingredient that's necessary for the batteries that power the electric vehicles and the green transition. So it's of interest to all of us to be engaged, to raise awareness, to hold our leaders accountable.
We're talking about Goma, which is the largest city in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. For someone who is hearing the name Goma for the first time, why is this city so significant for the region, and why is it being fought over so fiercely?
So Goma, as you pointed out, is a city in the eastern part of the DRC. It's the capital city of North Kivu. North Kivu is one of the provinces of the Congo, and Congo is right in the center of Africa. So if you open the map of Africa, you put where you see where the Congo is. It straddles the equator, and it's the size of Western Europe. And Goma is a capital city that's close to the eastern trade route to ship things toward Kenya, toward Tanzania, and so on, to find its way. It's right at the border of Rwanda. The other important thing about Goma is because due to the conflict, Goma is a city where you have the UN base. You also have a lot of humanitarian organizations who have their office in Goma. So they work from Goma and then get into the different towns across the Congo.
So this conflict has been building for a while. More than 500,000 people displaced just since the beginning of this year. But in recent days, there's really been a shift. There have been bodies on the streets. Hospitals there have been overwhelmed. People forced to flee.
In 2024, August of 2024, a ceasefire was signed between the Congolese government and M23, so that there could be some type of stability to seek a diplomatic solution. But in that period, there have been attacks on the M23 on Congolese civilians. There have been movement of the M23 taking more and more town. And then right when the Congolese president, Tshisekedi, was at Davos, the M23 started its largest push to take over Goma by giving ultimatum, and they have now have the control of the city of Goma. While they're taking town, they are also taking control of mining sites, and they're creating different form of taxation, generating revenue, exploiting minerals such as coltan in the Rubaya mine, the largest coltan mine in the world, like coltan being a mineral resource used in cell phones. So they are making money, they are trading in minerals, they're committing war crimes, according to the UN High Commission for Human Rights Office.
On one side, you have M23, which, according to the United Nations, is backed by Rwanda. Now, Rwanda denies that, but there's no denying that Rwanda is benefiting tremendously from this conflict. Can you tell us the extent to which Rwanda is involved in all of this and why?
It's totally logical for Rwanda to deny, right? Because we are talking about connecting them to a militia group committing crimes. I mean, I doubt that Rwanda will say, yes, we are actually supporting the M23. Right. They will not do that. But what we do have is evidence, right? Photographic evidence, video evidence, independent sources on the ground showing what they have done. they're using sophisticated weapons. I mean, can you imagine M23 is using night vision goggle, the same vehicle. They call it a surface-to-air missile. You don't buy a SAM vehicle at your car dealer, right?
Yeah.
These are sophisticated weapons. It's being tracked down to be part of the Rwandan Defense Force, lot of weapons, right? So we know the evidence is presented. It's denied by Rwanda, but it can be refuted because you can see it.
M23 is issuing mining permits. They're forming a state-like administration. That's according to a UN report. And the minerals that they're extracting from these mines are being routed into Rwanda. So what does that say about Rwanda's involvement?
Well, this is the historical involvement of Rwanda in the Congo since 1996. In 1996, the rebel group that is today M23 was called AFDL. They were issuing mining permits. This is why the claim is easy to dismiss, is that you see that they have economic interest. No, they go where the mines are, they go where they can make money, and then the money that they make is also to support their war efforts, it's also to support their backers. But the challenge for me is that for the past 30 years, with all the evidence that exists, how come nations supporting Rwanda and Uganda continue to only issue condemnation and no action? That's what's the most bizarre. Because these weapons, for example, that the M23 is using, is not manufactured on the African continent. How come we can't track down these weapons? Why aren't we holding the people supporting the M23 accountable?
The Congolese government cut ties with Rwanda over the weekend. In the capital, Kinshasa, protesters have been attacking foreign embassies. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has demanded that M23 withdraw troops. But all of this talk has led to very little action. So, Kambale, my question is, how do you think that Rwandan President Paul Kagame's relationship with the international community factors into all of this?
When it comes to the crimes of Rwanda, particularly the United States, does not want to hold Rwanda accountable. Right? And the reason why the United States does not want to hold Rwanda accountable is because Rwanda, and I will also add Uganda, these two nations are U.S. allies on the so-called war on terror. What does that concretely mean? It means that these nations give their soldiers to go fight American wars. So Ugandan soldiers are in Iraq, are in Afghanistan. Rwandan soldiers have been deployed for U.S. interest. They've been deployed in Haiti, they've been deployed in Mali, and lately even they are in Mozambique. So Western nations, because they don't want to engage directly on the African continent in some cases since Black Hawk Down, they use now African as mercenaries. Now the impact of that is that how are you going to hold them accountable for using the same weapons you gave them for other missions to commit crimes elsewhere? But it has happened before, where pressure was mounted on Western nations to hold Rwanda accountable, and it worked in 2012.
What about the economic relationship? I know that the EU struck a mineral deal with Rwanda last year. Rwanda is making a lot of money through selling minerals to the West, to companies, private companies. That economic relationship, does that play a factor in the lack of accountability?
Absolutely. I mean, think about what did you say? Last year, the European Union struck a deal for critical minerals with Rwanda. This same European Union put out a statement also condemning Rwanda of supporting the M23 rebels. This same European Union provided weapons last year to financial support for weapons last year to the Rwandan government. The European Union has the evidence of the UN group of experts showing that the rebel M23 in the Rubaya mine extracting coltan are taking the coltan from the Congo, bringing it into Rwanda and shipping it out to the world. They're getting the cost of the minerals much cheaper because they're not dealing with Congolese directly. But most importantly, we must know why Congo is destabilized for the past 2 decades. Congo is essential to the fourth industrial revolution. You cannot talk about AI without the Congo. You cannot fly a drone without Congo. You cannot have advanced technology without Congo. Why? Congo is the number one producer of cobalt in the world. It has one of the largest reserves of coltan in the world, and it has one of the largest lithium reserves in the world at Manono, right? So as long as Congo is kept destabilized and its resources are pilfered to other countries that can rebrand it as Rwandan product, then you don't have to deal with the DRC directly. And this actually happened 100 years ago with King Leopold, right? King Leopold of Belgium getting the rubber that was needed for the tires of the car, because there was the first industrial revolution then. They didn't have to deal with the DRC, and 10 to 15 million people die under King Leopold. And we are facing the same thing now.
So the Congolese president, he's, trying to draw attention to this issue. The UN is clearly aware of what's happening.
The problem is there are 2 or 3 members who will veto anything that may come out to hold Rwanda accountable. The first one will be the United States. And when you even think about that, you start even thinking about what is happening in Palestine, right? That the United States will always take a position to support its ally. So this is why Rwanda has not been held accountable. So the pressure cannot come from this government. The pressure has to come from below. It has to come from the people, right? The people of these countries, do they know, for example, that you are not able to deal with the fire in Los Angeles because your taxpayers' money is going to fund despot dictators on the African continent? So the more we are communicating with US citizens, with European citizens, in reminding them that the governments are doing really hideous dealings on the continent, then we have a chance. I received a picture of people I know in Goma. They are wondering why for the past 30 years they have to live this way, that they know how to protect themselves from bullets. These are ordinary citizens. We're seeing young Congolese organizing protests across the world, in Paris, in Belgium, I saw one in New York. People are organizing the Free Congo movement. Look, that we need to denounce the situation there. So it's tough. It's something that I have had to deal with for the past 30 years. Yeah. But I'm still convinced that we still have to tell the story to the people. And when people know, they will take action to end the carnage in the Congo.
So it continued long after Mobutu, first under Laurent Kabila, then under his son Joseph, who was notoriously corrupt. Again, the DRC's mineral wealth was sold off to foreign investors and at laughably low prices. When current President Felix Tshisekedi took office in 2019, he pledged to crack down on corruption. But both his elections were marred by fraud allegations. And for many people, not enough has changed. So, we've seen how corruption and exploitation stand in the way of a brighter future for Congolese people in the east of the DRC. More than 120 different militias are active here. Yes, you've heard right, 120. Some of them are small local groups. Others are larger militias with foreign backing, like the M23 and the FDLR. These militias have different aims and agendas. And one way of financing those goals? Exactly. We're back to the minerals. Look at the provinces worst hit by the conflict: Ituri, North Kivu, and South Kivu. That's also where many of the DRC's valuable natural resources are found. Let's take this example. In 2024, M23 militants took over these mining sites near the town of Rubeya. This area is where most of the DRC's coltan comes from. Remember that one? It's one of the minerals needed in your smartphone. So, it's valuable and lucrative for any groups that can get their hands on it. Decades of fighting by these groups and many others have left around 6 million people dead since 1996. Today, a further 7 million people in the DRC are internally displaced, the UN reports. Those people have lost everything. So, many people keep on suffering while others profit.
Congo has had neighbors that have not been good neighbors. neighbors that have exploited Congo's governance gaps.
There is no doubt that Rwanda benefits massively from the instability in the DRC. Most of the gold Rwanda exports is believed to be Congolese gold, smuggled across the border. And while the DRC is the world's biggest coltan producer, the biggest coltan exporter is Rwanda. But despite the smuggling, the European Union struck a controversial mineral deal with Rwanda. Local NGOs say this deal even fuels the conflicts. Rwanda is not the only place these resources get to. UN experts found gold and other minerals from the DRC were also being smuggled to Uganda, Burundi, Tanzania, and even the United Arab Emirates.